against Belgium. Is this a bit silly?
Well, yeah. I mean, as I understand it, the chant that's being referred to there went something along the lines of "We all voted out. We all voted out. Expletive off Europe. We all voted out." Which I mean, it's not very clever. It doesn't have the sort of wit or...
It's the template, isn't it?
Yes. It doesn't have the wit or the humour that you normally kind of associate with English fans, and people might laugh at that, but it's true. Football fans can be very witty with their chants.
Two World Wars and one World Cup. Doo-dah, doo-dah, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, when it comes to politics, FIFA is famously heavy-handed. They actually banned... the UK teams from wearing poppies on Armistice Day because they consider that an overt display of sort of politicisation of the game. But then again, I mean, good luck controlling tens of thousands of fans who won't be in the slightest affected by any punishment handed out.
Emil, thank you. Our World Cup news today. Darkness has descended on Wellington, parts of Wellington like Hataitai, Mount Cook, Newtown, Lower Hutt, Wadestown. On Alfred Street in the city, the lights have been not on at all this year, street lights, evidently, and it's taking weeks and months to fix, and the causes are complicated. What is it like near you, Catherine, and have you noticed it?
No, we seem to be well lit, although I've just moved house actually in the not in the same neighbourhood, but I've moved house, and there used to be a street light on the corner of our street that we decided was possessed, because it seemed to come on just after you went past. It would go off, and then it would come on again, but not while you were actually underneath it. Very strange.
We don't have these problems at all in Auckland, do we? It's such a well-maintained city.
You haven't been to Pukekohe, mate.
Sorry, high-pitched laugh there. Yeah.
If you had to... I mean, Wellington, as we know, is the progressive capital, as well as the capital. If you had to choose between a city with, say, prioritised parking stations for electric vehicles, you know, the fancy ideas, or a city that had all its electric street lights working, what would you opt for?
Do we have to have a choice?
Well, I don't know. Your street lights aren't working very well.
Maybe because people are plugging in their electric cars illicitly or something. Maybe that's it.
Dancing with the Stars viewers who tried to vote for David Seymour say their support for him last night was not counted because of a technical glitch. This was a hot Twitter topic after the show when he failed to make the finals, with the suspicion aired on Twitter that his clumsy dancing would be kept out of the series finale. But the texts are apparently independently audited. I think MediaWorks has said that before. And today it says different telcos have different processing abilities at peak times, meaning there can be a slight delay if there's a backlog of votes to process. Last night's voting numbers were unprecedented, which implies that all the contestants were similarly disadvantaged. David Seymour doesn't seem to care. Were you following his long sojourn on Dancing with the Stars? No, you weren't.
No, I was having my alone time.
That's right, you were having alone time. Yeah. Catherine?
No, I couldn't stand it. Well, after Susie Kate, I got voted out. I mean, the whole show was dead to me, really.
Did you enjoy his disruptive presence? I mean, does a show have to go the way of the makers want it to?
I think enjoy is a strong word here.
Okay.
Not an accurate one.
But anyway, thank you, David. Thank you, David, for the,
Thank you, David,
for the memories that are burned into my brain.
Catherine Robertson, thank you for being on the panel today.
Thank you.
Always lovely to talk to you. And Peter Fa'afia, good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks.
We're back tomorrow. Thanks for your company, everybody, and we'll see you then. Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
Ko te maera e hoa mai hei kōrero, kei te haere hei kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, the latest on the situation in Lower Hutt, where a gunman is reportedly on the loose. A New Zealand man is in a US hospital after being shot by the mother of a 14-year-old girl he met online. Detours, extra staff, longer working hours and increased fuel costs. Yes, the Waiōeka Gorge remains closed. The Young Labour's summer camp. Police charge a 20-year-old man with indecent assaults. Were there more strikes over National's 9 years or the current government's 9 months? A war of words breaks out between National leader Simon Bridges and acting PM Winston Peters, and a group of Porirua College students show Crystal Collins, and indeed us all really, how to sing the national anthem.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. Armed police are diverting traffic as officers hunt for a gunman after a shooting in the Hutt Valley in Wellington. Our reporter Emma Hatton is there. Emma, what can you tell us?
Oh, hello. Yeah, so we are at the corner of George Street and Speedy Street in Stokes Valley in Lower Hutt. Police have closed the intersection here and are diverting traffic away. About 30 metres down, we can see the house that's been cordoned off where the incident took place, and police are going door to door talking to neighbours. I just spoke with a neighbour myself. She said that at about 2 o'clock she was walking down the road and saw a woman and a young boy come out of the house, and the woman was calling for help. The neighbour called the ambulance and the police for them, and so she saw that, and she said it was quite terrifying, and she isn't able to go back into her home yet because her home is right next door and is also cordoned off for now.
OK, Emma, thanks. That's Emma Hatton in Wellington, and we'll keep you posted as details come to hand. The Youth Minister hopes a court case relating to the young Labour summer camp scandal will help bring parents peace of mind. The Labour Party came under fire earlier this year after 4 teenagers complained they'd been sexually harassed at a youth camp in Waihi in February. A 20-year-old man has now been charged with 4 counts of indecent assault and will appear in the Auckland District Court on July the 5th. Pene Henare says the right process has been followed.
I hope that whatever results from the pending court case and of course the internal investigation that's going to happen, I hope that it strengthens civics and gives parents like myself peace of mind that when we send our kids to kaupapa, whether it's political or school event, that they're going to be safe.
Pene Henare. A review into the Labour Party's handling of the matter is due to report back in about a month. An aviation umbrella body says a report issued today into a fatal helicopter crash will help enhance safety in the industry. The pilot, Steve Askin, a decorated SAS veteran, died while fighting a raging fire in Christchurch's Port Hills. An investigation found the helicopter company, Way to Go Heli Services, did not have a system for calculating the aircraft's weight as it was required to. The helicopter had also previously lost a window during a firefighting operation, but the pilot had not told his bosses. John Nicholson from the Aviation Industry Association says it's essential that proper procedures are followed when something like that happens.
We encourage everyone to report every incident because the better the reporting, the more we learn from them. This was an individual decision, as I understand it, where the decision was made not to report it, and the company didn't know anything about it.
John Nicholson says the public can be confident helicopter services are not being run by cowboys. The police in the United States city of Richmond, Virginia, say a New Zealand man remains in hospital after being shot while trying to break into a home in Goochland County, just outside the city. Troy Skinner was shot by the mother of a 14-year-old girl who had earlier ended an online relationship with him. Graham Acton reports.
The police say Mr Skinner had travelled to Virginia from New Zealand last week in an attempt to meet the 14-year-old, who had made it clear she no longer wished to communicate with him. Goochland County Sheriff James Agnew says the girl's mother confronted Mr Skinner with a .22 pistol and shot him after he broke a glass door and attempted to enter the house. Mr Skinner remains in a Richmond hospital with a gunshot wound to his neck. He is expected to survive the shooting and is reportedly refusing to speak to officers. Ko Graham Acton, Tēnei.
Up to 60 empty houses earmarked for demolition to make way for new roads and houses will now house homeless families over the winter. The Monte Cecilia Housing Trust has leased the properties in Pakuranga and Mount Roskill from Auckland Transport and Housing New Zealand under a new scheme. Housing New Zealand is checking to make sure they're livable while Monte Cecilia furnishes and manages the houses, but the government is footing the bill. Monte Cecilia's Bernie Smith says the government is walking the talk when it comes to housing families in need.
It's not just an instant fix, it's a long-term strategic way of dealing with the homeless situation that we're confronted with. We're working with the government's working with us, and together we're going on this journey to ensure that people aren't living in cars and on the streets this winter.
Bernie Smith says more social housing must be built for the families once the properties are bulldozed. The Land and Water Forum says resolving iwi water rights and introducing nitrogen limits in all catchments will be the most difficult of the tasks it has set the government. But the chair, Hugh Logan, says doing so is essential if it wants to stop the decline of water quality by 2020. The forum's latest report, commissioned by the government last year, makes several key recommendations, including that a national body be set up to oversee freshwater management. Mr Logan says limiting nitrogen in all catchments could mean moratoriums on intensive dairying. He says that, along with resolving iwi rights, will be difficult, and even some within the forum disagree on how it should be tackled.
This is a very thorny issue, and I think anyone who's followed it will realise that it's controversial in many parts of the country, with sector groups sometimes at loggerheads about how to do it.
The Land and Water Forum's Hugh Logan. It's 5:06. Australia's future in the World Cup will be decided tonight as they play Peru in their last group game. The Socceroos need a big win over the South Americans and hope France beat Denmark in the other Group C game. With France already qualified for the round of 16, there is a chance they may not play their best against the Danes. However, Australian coach Bert van Marwijk doesn't think that will be the case.
They are proud players and they played 2 times and they won, but they didn't play the way they can play, and they are one of the best teams in the world. So I think they wanted to prove it and show it to the whole world.
Bert van Marwijk. Group D will also be decided overnight, with Croatia already through and Nigeria, Iceland and Argentina battling for the other remaining spot. Meanwhile, Portugal came perilously close to a group stage exit from the World Cup during a frenetic stoppage time period when unfancied Iran equalised through a penalty and almost scored a winner after Cristiano Ronaldo had earlier missed from that same spot. And the former world tennis #1 Andy Murray has won his first match in almost a year with a straight sets win over fellow 3-time Grand Slam champion Stan Wawrinka at Eastbourne in England. The Scot was playing only his second competitive match since Wimbledon last year following hip surgery and won the match 6-1, 6-3. And that's the news.
Bank workers pressured to sell.
This is a systemic problem throughout the banking sector in New Zealand, where pressure to sell financial products is the main driver of behaviour.
Public sector staff taking action over pay.
We've got dreadful pay systems in the public service. The main issue for us is that our members are frustrated and feeling under pressure.
A spike in industrial action.
We know why people are asking us for more, because they know we listen and we're prepared to help them.
What do you want? What do you need? Morning Report with Guy Spinner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the country's outgoing Chief of Defence, Lieutenant General Tim Keating, discusses the 2 ongoing Afghanistan investigations and his efforts to stamp out persistent sexism. And after 10, the dynamic Heath Quartet from the UK on introducing the classics to children. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now looking at the shore forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland 2, Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taiape. Showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms in the west, clearing from the south later tonight. Snow to 500 metres from the desert roads southwards. Gisborne to Wairarapa, scattered showers becoming confined to the coast this evening. Snow to 500 metres in Wairarapa. Orowhenua to Wellington, scattered showers developing this afternoon, some heavy with hail and snow to 500 metres, clearing overnight, fine spells increasing tomorrow. Coastal Canterbury and the Kaikoura coast, showers clearing overnight and becoming mainly fine. The remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury, also Nelson, Buller, Westland and Northern Fiordland, fine with frosts tomorrow morning. Southern Fiordland, Otago and Southland, a few wintry showers, mainly in the south with snow to 300 metres at first. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower. RNZ National, it's coming up to 5:10 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Nice to have you back too. Thank you. You would have heard at the top of News and Crossing to Emma Hatton, our reporter at this incident in Lower Hutt. Reports of a shooting, police very much at the scene, a road cordoned off. Emma is there, she is available to us live. The moment there is anything further to report, we are very much keeping an eye on what is happening there, and we will update you if there is anything further to add. Let's begin with a very strange state of affairs. A New Zealand man is in a US hospital after being shot by the mother of a teenage girl he'd met online. Police in Goochland County, which is just outside Richmond, Virginia, say the 25-year-old man, who's been named as Troy Skinner, was shot while trying to break into the family's home on Saturday, New Zealand time. Authorities say the alert was raised when they received reports of a gunshot and a man dressed in black attempting to force his way into the family's house. Graham Acton reports.
The county sheriff's office says Troy Skinner appears to have targeted the 14-year-old girl who he met online using the Discord app popular with gamers. From airline receipts found in his pockets, police have established he flew from New Zealand to the US via Australia last week, then taking an overnight flight from LA to Washington and then a Greyhound bus to Richmond in Virginia. On the way, police say he stopped at a Walmart store to buy a folding knife, pepper spray and duct tape, all found in his backpack. Goochland Sheriff James Agnew says police were alerted via a 911 call from a normally quiet neighbourhood.
A sheriff's office received a 911 call initially from the husband of a woman who lives off Steeplechase Parkway about a man who was attempting to break into her house.
The woman was at home with her two teenage daughters, one of whom had already clearly indicated she wanted nothing more to do with Troy Skinner. Sheriffs say he first rang the doorbell, but when no one answered, he went to the back of the house and appeared at the back door with a brick in his hand, where he was confronted by the girl's mother.
She yelled to him, "I have a gun, don't come in here, go away." He didn't listen, and at some point in this interaction, he picked up the landscape stone, threw it through the glass door, completely shattered it.
James Agnew says Troy Skinner then reached in to open the door and was shot on the neck.
That began a lengthy period of investigation this weekend and trying to find out what the story of this guy was. His arrival here and his actions were totally unexpected by anyone.
The victims of the attack have asked to remain anonymous, but the incident has stunned neighbours like Tom Blauvelt, whose 5 children were at home at the time.
A component of you that knows it could happen, but it's different when it actually does happen. And the closer to home, particularly as a parent, the scarier it gets. My wife got a text from a friend and said, "Hey, there's a response going on in your neighborhood," and it turned a nice peaceful date night into something that was a little bit just heart-stopping.
Troy Skinner is expected to survive the shooting, but has so far declined to speak to the police. He will be charged with breaking and entering with a deadly weapon with intent to commit a serious offence. The FBI are also involved, and he may end up facing federal charges. For Checkpoint Corps, Graham Acton, 10A.
The Mayor of Gisborne, along with one of the major trucking operators in and out of the city and indeed the region, are calling for State Highway 2 through the Waiōeka Gorge to be made more secure. The Mayor, Meng Foon, has told Checkpoint that he and other regional mayors are waiting for solutions from NZTA as they seek to make the main road between Gisborne and the north of the country, including Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga, less vulnerable to slips. The gorge is currently closed as a result of slips in the weekend, and the detour is very long. In 2012, the Waiōeka Gorge was closed for a month and millions of dollars were spent on the clean-up and on slip-proofing it to keep it open. Heavy rainfall, river flooding, steep hillsides, thick bush and a winding and very narrow road in parts make the risk of slips a fact of life. But Meng Foon says the road must be protected from them.
Well, it may be a fact of life, but it's terribly frustrating.
To study the gorge's track record, it's illuminating to quote NZTA itself as they respond to individual incidents. March 2012.
The Waiōeka Gorge could remain closed for a month.
9 months later, in December 2012.
Work continues at the Waiōeka Gorge to fully reinstate State Highway 2.
March 2015.
Rockfall prevention work continues in Waiōeka Gorge.
July 2017.
Approximately 1,000 cubic metres of debris fell across both lanes at the midway point of the gorge, but a further 3,500 cubic metres has come down since.
February 2018.
Flooding and slips have forced the closure of part of the Waiōeka Gorge between Opotiki and Gisborne.
And then, of course, last weekend.
The Waiōeka Gorge since 2012, I suppose, was the big one. We were out for 5 or 6 weeks with it closed.
in 2012, and since then, every year, we've had closures on a fairly regular basis every year where we've had a few days out.
Meaning you have to head north by first driving south for more than 2 hours, if you can.
And I mean, we had situations last year where it wasn't only closed, the Waiweka wasn't closed, but we had a weather bomb towards Napier as well, and that closed the road south. So actually Gisborne was cut off for a couple of days last year, both directions. That's Steve Wetherell, Chief Executive of Wetherell Transport, a trucking company that's one of the very biggest users of the roads in and out of Gisborne. In Auckland, Tauranga, Hamilton, etc., where over 40% of the New Zealand market lives, well, usually they access those areas by driving north up State Highway 2. Usually. So at the moment we're transporting everything. We're going via Napier. So we go Gisborne south for 2.5, 3 hours, and then turn up and come over the Napier Taupo and back up to Auckland and Tauranga that way.
And what's that adding to your trip?
It's adding a good 2.5, 3 hours to the trip.
That's each way, and time is of the essence because what's in those trucks?
Fresh fruit and produce. Our biggest customer is Leaderbrand Produce, so there's a lot of salad and broccoli, lettuce, etc.
This isn't about Auckland and Hamilton's right to have a fresh salad. It's about Gisborne, the country's poorest region on a per capita basis, getting its highly perishable produce to market.
And they need to actually deliver this product on a daily basis because they have contractual obligations to the supermarkets, to the supply chains all over New Zealand.
That's Meng Foon, Gisborne's mayor.
Having good transport systems, getting our products out there fresh first is mightily important to the well-being of our community.
When they can't, from the growers to the transport operators to the buyers they're serving, Mayor Foon sums it up with a famously delicate New Zealand turn of phrase.
They are frustrated to buggery.
It's not that the goods don't get through, there are contracts, they have to basically. It's that the cost of getting them through escalates because each round trip increases by 5 to 6 hours. Now, Steve Wetherell uses Tauranga as a hub. His drivers can do a return trip between there and Gisborne each day, meeting drivers doing return trips between Tauranga and Auckland. Very simple, very manageable, very efficient, and everyone gets home at night. But when the gorge is closed...
Instead of Tauranga being the swap-over point, they end up swapping over in Taupo.
Which is the wrong direction for half the country's domestic market.
Or living away from home altogether and just going end to end and stopping at either Auckland or Gisborne.
Which means more fuel, fewer journeys per driver, and accommodation costs for drivers who normally rebound into Tauranga each night, but who must now stay away from home.
It's a huge extra cost in accommodations.
And you can't roster for that.
I guess it's the don't know factor. It's the hard one for us because we can't actually plan what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. We just know that it's likely to be closed until the end of the week. We could get to the end of the week and they turn around and say it might be closed for another 4 or 5 days.
Gisborne isn't easy to get to full stop. If you want to fly there tomorrow, a 1-hour journey from Auckland, Air New Zealand only has one flight with seats under $300. The next cheapest flight, a seat-only fare, is $356. The train, there was one, but part of the track was washed out in 2012.
The railway line between Gisborne and Wairoa, for goodness sake, fix it.
Unfixed, that means more trucks on the road, and to the south, State Highway 2 is... And this is the word used by the Regional Economic Development Minister himself, challenging. And to the north, well, this week it's closed. Here's Mayor Foon.
We've been in talks with New Zealand Transport Agency for a couple of years now in terms of the three mayors getting together, Napier, Wairoa, myself and Opotiki, to actually chat about the route security of State Highway 2. To date, not a meeting.
So, mayors raised flags, and transport operators can give you a detailed list of all the times this has happened before. Gisborne just wants a road to the north that stays open. They don't mind the fact it's long and winding. They understand they live a long way from almost anywhere. But for the road to be shut as regularly as State Highway 2 is, well, they've had enough of that.
It messes up a lot of people's lives and a lot of people's ability to get their produce to market on time.
That's Steve Wetherell from Steve Wetherell Transport, from Wetherell Transport. We'll hear more from him after 6. And we're also going to hear from NZTA's Regional Relationships Manager, who is working on a solution. Obviously, this is a risk-prone area. Slip-prone area. How do you keep the slips off the road? 5:19. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. The Young Labour summer camp controversy is back in the spotlight, with the police arresting a 20-year-old man and charging him with indecent assault. The party came under fire earlier this year after 4 teenagers complained they'd been sexually harassed at a Labour youth camp in Waihi in February. Here is our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
The emerging scandal prompted a police investigation in March and saw Labour call in a senior lawyer to review its actions. Today, news of an arrest, a 20-year-old man charged with 4 counts of indecent assault. Labour says it backs the police decision, but with the case now before the courts, MPs weren't keen to comment further.
No, that's before the court side. I'm not going to comment any further.
Those are matters for you to discuss with the Labour Party. I don't have any particular role or comment to make on that.
I'm not across it.
And the acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, won't talk either.
Look, the matter's sub judice and I can't make a comment.
But politically, is it distracting?
The matter's sub judice and I can't make a comment.
Oh, look, we're just getting on with governing the country.
Calvin Davis is the acting Labour leader, while Jacinda Ardern is on parental leave. He was left to field questions for the party, with its president, Nigel Harworth, turning down interview requests. It emerged late last week Labour's General Secretary, Andrew Curtin, is resigning to take up a job at Air New Zealand in August. But Mr Davis says that move has nothing to do with the recent arrest or Labour's inquiry.
In my understanding, it's just one of those things. He resigned last week, he's got a new opportunity, and this has come out.
The review, authored by the senior lawyer, Maria Austin, was expected to report back roughly now, but Mr Davis says it will be another month. The Labour MP and Youth Minister, Peeni Henare, hopes its findings will give parents some peace of mind.
Look, as a parent, before we send our kids anywhere, we make sure that the environment is safe for them. So I'd expect that any event from now and into the future will take into account that you've got clearly a young group of people. And so all of the safeguards that I'd expect as a parent should be in place before a parent even sends them.
In the wake of the complaints, Labour suspended all events run by its youth wing and banned alcohol from all events where those under 18 were present. The 20-year-old man is due to appear in the Auckland District Court on July the 5th. Atu iti whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch ahu.
A report has found the removal of doors from a helicopter which crashed during Christchurch's Port Hills fires, plural, in February last year, set in motion a series of events that ended in the pilot's death. That included the loss of a window, the second time that had happened with that helicopter. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission also found the helicopter company did not have a system for calculating the aircraft's weight, as it was required to. Looking at this for us is Anne-Marie May.
The report says the removal of several windows caused fluctuating air pressure in the helicopter's cabin, and that, combined with turbulence, led to a side window falling into the machine. When that happened, the pilot and decorated SAS veteran Steve Askin reduced speed, which caused the helicopter's tail rotor to dip and come into contact with the monsoon bucket beneath the aircraft. TAKE's chief accident investigator, Captain Tim Burfoot, says the helicopter company also did not have a system for calculating the aircraft's weight as it was required to do.
The Commission found that for each time that the pilot was lifting a full monsoon bucket out of the dipping pond, the helicopter was probably being overloaded, and the pilot didn't really have enough tools at hand to be able to accurately calculate what the weight was. He may not have known that actually he was overloading the helicopter at the time.
TAKE says there may not be enough awareness within the helicopter industry of the additional risks involved in using monsoon buckets during firefighting operations. The operator of the helicopter that crashed is Way to Go Heli Services. Its owner, Rob Kitto, wouldn't be interviewed, but his quick comment has been voiced.
We don't want the wrong message going out there that this company is inadequate. So we have worked with the Transport Accident Investigation Commission on their whole investigation.
The head of the Aviation Industry Association, John Nicholson, says today's report will add to what has already been learnt over the years. He says that includes proper procedures when a window is lost, something Steve Askin had experienced twice in his helicopter while fighting fires.
We encourage everyone to report every incident, because the better the reporting, the more we learn from them. This was an individual decision, as I understand it, where the decision was made not to report it, and the company didn't know anything about it.
John Nicholson says the public can be confident that New Zealand's helicopter services are not being run by cowboys.
We know that the numbers of hours being flown by helicopters in the last 5 years have gone up by 50%, and the accident rate has come down over that time. So we're seeing more flying more safely.
Steve Askin's family refused to comment on the take report, saying nothing they could say would bring him back. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
5:24, a political war of words, which is much of politics, unfortunately, isn't it, has broken out over strikes. National leader Simon Bridges claims New Zealand has had more strikes and threats of industrial action under the present government than during the previous national government's entire 9 years in power. Is that claim correct? Have there been more strikes in the last 9 months than in the last 9 years? Our reporter Katie Doyle spent the day crunching the numbers and filed this report.
National is keen to paint the current government as union-friendly and says that means more strikes. The party's leader, Simon Bridges, says in fewer than 9 months, 32,000 workers have either been involved in industrial action or have signalled an intention to do so. He says this number far exceeds the 27,000 workers who did take part in strike action during National's 3 terms in power.
This is remarkable. In 9 months under this government, we've seen more strikes in terms of people out there wanting to do it and doing it than we saw in 9 years under a National-led government.
The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, hit back, calling the claim nonsense.
In this case, it's about negotiations. They have not gone on strike yet, whereas he's saying that industrial action and negotiations for a fair day's pay, for a fair day's work and all sorts of conditions around that, just those negotiations are strikes, and they're not.
Problem is, the data is unreliable. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment does collect figures on work stoppages, but it's not an exhaustive list. The Public Service Association estimates under National there were 1 or 2 strikes a year across a range of organisations, from Statistics and Housing New Zealand to the Qualifications Authority and Community Living Trust. Stephen Blumenfeld, who's the director of Victoria University's Centre for Labour, Employment and Work, says it's very difficult to get accurate data on strikes. He says historically, strike action is more common under Labour governments than National, although they are less common now than during the 1970s and 80s.
Really, every time Labour forms the government, we do tend to have more strikes. But the main reason for that is that the only workers that can lawfully strike are those who are union members, and the vast majority of union members, going back about 14, 15 years now, have been in the public sector.
Dr Blumenfeld says the last National government made it clear public sector workers weren't going to get the pay increases, while Labour raised workers' expectations of wage rises during the election campaign. Thousands of nurses are now preparing to walk off the job on July the 5th for the first time in nearly 3 decades. The chief executive of the nurses' organisation, Memo Musa, was asked at a press conference last week if they were taking the action now because they thought a Labour-led government would be more sympathetic.
I don't think it's about sympathy. It's really the fact that you've had 10 years of underfunding. We've had 3 years of the last settlement, which did not resolve a number of issues related to working conditions and safe staffing.
But Stephen Blumenfeld says public sector workers, like nurses and teachers, are threatening or considering strike action because they believe they'll have a better chance of being heard by this government.
For 9 years under National, public sector workers, including those in education and health, were squeezed pretty tight, earning pay increases that were just at or below CPI, and over time that builds up the difference between, where inflation has gone, over that period of time and where their wage rates have gone.
The question now is whether other sectors will now follow nurses and staff at IRD and the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment by planning to walk off the job in a bid to get better pay and conditions. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
Let's stay with politics and wars of words. Well, sort of. US President Donald Trump has waded into the Red Hen restaurant debate, telling the owners they should focus on cleaning their filthy premises rather than kicking out his press secretary. The owner of the Red Hen restaurant in Lexington asked White House Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders to leave on Saturday night after staff expressed concern about her working in an inhumane and unethical administration. Today, Mr. Trump tweeted in support of his staffers, saying the restaurant should focus on cleaning its filthy canopies, doors and windows, rather than refusing to serve a fine person like Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Jonah Green from Reuters reports.
Not one to let any slight go unchallenged, Donald Trump used the power of his presidency Monday to attack a small restaurant in Lexington, Virginia, tweeting to his 53 million followers that, quote, "The Red Hen restaurant should focus more on cleaning its filthy canopies, doors, and windows, badly needs a paint job, rather than refusing to serve a fine person like Sarah Huckabee Sanders." The controversy began when Stephanie Wilkinson, the owner of the Red Hen, asked White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders to leave Friday night because of her job at the White House. Local media quoted Wilkinson as saying her employees didn't feel comfortable waiting on Sanders. The news spread when Sanders posted it on Twitter, saying the owner's actions, quote, "say far more about her than about me." This follows an incident last week when protesters confronted Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen at a Mexican restaurant. At an immigration protest Saturday, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, a consistent foe of Trump's, urged people to continue confronting Trump staffers in public. But House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi on Twitter made it clear that she was not on board with that, writing, quote, "In the crucial months ahead, we must strive to make America beautiful again. Trump's daily lack of civility has provoked responses that are predictable but unacceptable." Meanwhile, outraged Sanders supporters have begun leaving negative reviews of the restaurant online. One said Wilkinson's actions were unprofessional and disrespectful, but others rallied to the Red Hen's defense, saying, quote, "Thank you for being true patriots and true Americans. You have a right to refuse service to evil people." Still, others stopped by the restaurant to show their support in person. Local media say it was closed Saturday night so customers wouldn't be exposed to, quote, "any potential unpleasantness from outside entities."
Jonah Green from Reuters, who surely has the most laid-back voice in broadcasting. Just before we move on, a fact. Red Hen, which attacked Trump as filthy, had a single, which Trump attacked as filthy, had a single health code violation, decorating with canning jars in 2017. In the same year, Mar-a-Lago's kitchens were found to have over a dozen violations. Sounds a little bit like the pot calling the kettle black. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, where we use facts all the time. Coming up, empty houses which were due to be bulldozed for new roads or state housing redevelopments will now house homeless families. Over winter, they are being retained to be used. Very, very cold winter. At the moment, the fight over a plan to remove a 119-year-old wooden grandstand overlooking the Takika Showgrounds goes to court, and a group of Porirua College students show Crystal Collins and the rest of us how to sing the anthem and actually make it sound rather wonderful, following up on our conversation about the anthem from last night. Don't forget, you can text us 2101, you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we are, of course, on Facebook and Twitter, known as Next with Business. But before it all, Anna Thomas with the headlines.
Thanks, John. The police are still hunting for a gunman in the Hutt Valley after a shooting in Stokes Valley this afternoon. A man is in a stable condition in hospital with a serious chest injury. A neighbour told RNZ's reporter she was walking down the street at about 2 o'clock when a woman calling for help came out of the house with a young boy. The woman called the police and ambulance. She said it was quite terrifying. The house is cordoned off about 30 metres from the intersection of George and Speedy Streets, along with that of the neighbour who helped. The Youth Minister, Pene Henare, hopes parents will be reassured that the Young Labour summer camp scandal has resulted in court action. 4 16 to 18-year-olds complained of sexual harassment at the youth camp in Waihi in February. A 20-year-old man will appear in the Auckland District Court next month on 4 charges of indecent assault. The Land and Water Forum says the government should create a national body to oversee freshwater management to halt the decline in water quality. The forum's chair, Hugh Logan, says the most difficult tasks will be resolving iwi water rights and introducing nitrogen limits for all catchments. He says limits on nitrogen could mean moratoriums on intensive dairying. A New Zealand man in the United States is in the United States hospital and is refusing to speak to the police after being shot by the mother of a teenage girl he met online. The police in Goochland County near Richmond, Virginia, say 25-year-old Troy Skinner was shot while trying to break into the family's home 3 days ago. A transport accident investigation says removing a helicopter's windows was one reason for a crash which killed firefighter Steve Askin in Christchurch's Port Hills last year. The Commission also found the helicopter company, Way to Go Heli Services, did not have the required system for calculating the aircraft's weight. A woman has died after she was hit by a car in Upper Hutt in Wellington this afternoon. Emergency services were called to the Akatarawa Road just after 2 o'clock. Police are investigating. That's the news. I'll be back with a full news bulletin at 6.
Just over 25 minutes away. Thank you very much indeed. Anna, Nona is on the other side of me in the Auckland studio. Hi, Nona Peltier.
Hello.
Economic confidence is up in 6 of the country's 11 regions, not Auckland though. What's the latest survey telling us?
Well, Auckland is the most gloomy region of all of the regions.
That's because it never stops raining here.
You think that's one of the reasons?
That
wasn't on the list.
The climate
actually,
is ridiculous in the city.
That was not on the list.
Right, okay.
No, I have to say. The number one thing on the list was house prices. Yeah, they've been falling some time. They're now back to the levels we saw in August 2016.
So people are gloomy about the prices falling?
Yeah.
Although the people not in the market.
Well, I don't know who's the gloomiest of all, but
right.
Yes, it's not just the housing prices, that's one indicator, but I guess when your house prices are falling, you're not probably going to the restaurant as much. And also people complain, once you get into that downward spiral, people are complaining about the congestion in the city and other things. And so overall, that's a gloomy outlook for Auckland. And, well, that's what you'd expect.
But 6 of 11 regions.
Yeah, but some of them are very happy.
Yeah, probably not in population terms, that wouldn't be more than half the country, but in regional terms,
yes,
it's just over half, so
yeah,
that's
it's
good.
A fairly, yes, and then of course the Bay of Plenty, it rose sharply, so 45% of the households there expect things to get better, and that's a big turnaround from previous years.
What's driving that? Anyone
know? Well, the kiwi fruit industry's picked up, I guess just people, maybe it's sunny there, I don't know. Could be whatever, and also because I guess a lot of Aucklanders are leaving the region, maybe moving over there and lifting the spirits, who knows. Also, Nelson, Marlborough and the West Coast were also pretty upbeat. But, the rural sector generally was a little bit downbeat because of the problem with M. bovis affecting cattle herds, and that's sort of taken the edge off for some of the regions. And the most negative of all is probably not surprising is Taranaki because of the lack of, the ban on offshore oil gas exploration. That has certainly raised a question mark over the households there about their own future. So I guess you'd expect that uncertainty to have filtered through to this survey.
Now, wine exports predicted to fall in volume due to a lower than expected harvest.
Yeah, now that's a funny one, speaking of the weather. So we had good weather, and that lifted the harvest by 6% over the year earlier.
Right.
But not as much as the industry was hoping for.
Oh, okay.
So it was warm weather, but the weather wasn't quite good enough to satisfy the wine industry. They had big ambitions. That industry is worth $1.7 billion, and so their exports are not going to hit the mark they were hoping for because, well, I guess the sun shone.
Gosh, it's growing fast. I remember certainly not that long ago when they crossed $1 billion and they were celebrating that. They're almost double that now. That's extraordinary.
They're still aiming for more. So that's going to be, well, I guess it was a bit of a disappointment. But nevertheless, it's still a pretty healthy industry, and it did grow. The grape harvest was produced a harvest of 419,000 tonnes of grapes, 6% up on last year.
The highest average per bottle price on the market in the UK, New Zealand wine, higher than France, higher than America.
Yeah, well, fair enough. And that's partly because Delegate, which is one of our listed wine companies, have positioned the New Zealand wine at the high end of the market. And that's really made it a lot easier for even smaller growers to get into that market and charge those premium prices for our boutique wines. And they're pretty good wines.
What did the markets do today?
Well, interesting. The market was pretty negative at the open, and that's partly flowing on from what we saw with Wall Street. They had a miserable day. It was basically a sea of red everywhere in Asia, and so not surprising, New Zealand opened weaker. Wall Street tumbled overnight. It was the steepest loss in more than 2 months, so pretty bad, and that's with people concerned about trade, all the stuff that's being churned up in that area, and then uncertainty over oil, and you name it. There's a lot of doubts, uncertainty, a lot of risk out there. So there was a big sell-off in Asia. The markets were looking pretty sad on it, New Zealand too. But we closed down just 6 points at the end of the day, which is remarkable. 8,990 was our close. And the New Zealand dollar is trading at 68.9 cents US, which is just where it was pretty much yesterday. 93 Australian, again, hardly changed. And 51.9 British pence.
Nana Peltier, our Auckland business reporter, thank you very much indeed. The government's regional fuel tax changes have become law this evening ahead of its planned introduction in Auckland on Sunday. It means people in the city will be paying another 11.5 cents at the pump in order to pay for major transport projects. Politicians have just finished debating the regional fuel tax bill at Parliament, and the National Party wasn't about to let it go through without making its opposition very plainly known. That's despite accidentally not voting against the bill at a second reading in what appeared to be a lapse of focus at the late hour. Transport Minister Phil Twyford told the House he's excited about the possibilities for transport infrastructure and coming solutions to congestion once the tax is implemented in the city, in which one in three New Zealanders live, and it's certainly our most congested city too.
What the National Party doesn't seem to understand is that there is no magic money tree to pay for these transport projects. And you'd think they'd know that because they left a $9 billion hole in their transport plan that they had no explanation for. Unfunded. Madam Speaker, let's be clear that Auckland Council will be accountable for how it uses this money. It's important that Auckland Council doesn't just start projects, but it completes them on time and on budget. For that reason, this bill provides for appropriate Crown oversight of any revenue raised, tight controls on the use of that revenue, a ministerial review procedure, and ongoing public reporting to provide transparency to the public. But let's be clear about one more thing. Take this regional fuel tax away and Auckland would be back in the position of having empty promises of projects and no money to pay for them.
So that's Phil Twyford. Nationals Transport spokesperson Jamie Lee Ross says all Mr Twyford's doing is giving his counterpart at Auckland Council a handout.
The reason why we are passing, or this House is passing, this piece of legislation is because it lets the Auckland Council off the hook. Phil Goff seems to think it's bad for this side of the House to expect the Auckland Council to find savings. It was his own former colleague that went into an election saying that he would find 3 to 6% savings within the Auckland Council's budgets. It was his own colleague that said after the election to the media that's what would be happening. But it turns out that's not possible, according to Phil Goff and the Auckland Council. And so Phil Twyford has rode into town and said, hey, I've got an idea. Let's go and tax people more, up to 15 cents, to 11.5 cents a litre.
That's Jamie Lee Ross, Nationals Transport spokesperson. By the way, the fuel price hike in Auckland isn't the only change scheduled for Sunday. The rest of them nationwide, changes to working for families and superannuation, as well as a payment for new parents under the flagship Families Package plus extended paid parental leave, and changes to ensure multinationals aren't avoiding their tax obligations in this country will also come into force. We're going to keep an eye on the later one around multinationals and the tax they pay in New Zealand. I'm sure that we'll get an interview with Apple, which will be very exciting. Rescuers in northern Thailand have resumed their search for a group of 12 teenage footballers and their coach who are missing inside a cave in the northern province of Chiang Mai. The group, who are from the area, went into the caves on Saturday. Heavy rain has flooded stretches of the caves and it's feared they have gone deeper inside. CNN's Linda Kincaid has more.
12 teenage football players and their coach are believed to be somewhere in this cave in northern Thailand. Their bikes, backpacks and shoes were noticed at the entrance midday on Saturday. Rescuers believe the group entered the cave through a narrow 15-metre long tunnel, and then rising waters from heavy rainfall blocked their path. Park officials, local police and 17 members of the Thai Royal Navy SEAL diving team have been deployed to assist in the search and rescue efforts. An image posted on the SEAL's Facebook page said divers had to dive to a depth of 5 metres to access the main chamber where the missing people are believed to be located. One local official says he believes the boys are still alive because they are athletes, and a relative of a missing boy is also confident.
I believe because their coach is a strong and healthy person. He can lead the youths.
I believe in his strength.
A sign outside the cave warns of danger during the flooding season, which is just getting underway. In the past, others have gotten stuck in the cave and have survived for days.
CNN's Linda Kincaid. Up to 60 empty houses due to be bulldozed for new roads or state housing redevelopments will now house homeless families over winter. The Monte Cecilia Housing Trust has leased the properties in Pakuranga and Mount Roskill from both Auckland Transport and Housing New Zealand in a new multi-agency initiative. Eva Corlett spoke to a family who've just moved in to a Pakuranga house.
The woman, who RNZ will call Lani, moved to the 3-bedroom brick and tile house with her husband and their 4 children aged between 7 and 18 just over a week ago. The family has bounced between motels for months because private rentals are out of reach and social housing is scarce.
New Zealand is very, very difficult. It's very, very hard life because everything is some money. Everything uses some money. I went to the Montecilian and talked to them about I need help, and they helped me.
The rooms are still sparsely furnished, a dining table with 6 chairs, beds in each room, a fridge in the kitchen. There's a large leafy back garden where a pukeko is roaming about, and a garage near the street housing a few boots and jackets. But it's the closest thing they've had to a home in months.
In a motel, I stay at one room. If I was sick, all the people of my family will be sick. When I stay here, it's a big place. It's very, very nice for me and my family. It's really good.
Lani has several health issues, including a bad back and hip and asthma. Her husband is her full-time carer. He places a cup of sweet tea next to me as she describes the small things a home can offer, like a Sunday lunch with extended family in their own home.
Last Sunday, I have a tuanai from my husband's family. They come with food and make a tuanai here to help and say thanks to God for the house.
Bernie Smith of Monte Cecilia Housing Trust says the trust has so far taken on 9 of possibly 60 Auckland Transport properties, with more to come from that project. It has also taken over 5 Housing New Zealand properties in Mount Roskill, tipped for redevelopment.
The new government has come in and the Housing Minister has made it quite clear that there's been quite a lot of public backlash, particularly over 2015-2016, that Housing New Zealand property has been boarded up for 6 months, 12 months, even longer. And this new government has said, no, it's not going to happen on our watch.
It's a slightly unusual project. Auckland Transport owns these properties. Housing New Zealand checks if they're appropriate to live in. Monte Cecilia houses the families and furnishes the properties, and the government pays for it. Mr Smith says that the government is walking the talk, but some concerns remain.
There's no social housing out the other side. There's no affordable rental. So the government, in my opinion, is hell-bent on building Kiwi build first homeowners. We need thousands of social housing and affordable rentals. Otherwise, we're going to be in the same situation for the next 4 or 5 years.
Bernie Smith says it's a rolling project where houses will become available over the next few months as others are demolished. Auckland Transport bought the houses so it could bowl them to make way for the Eastern Busway. In a statement, it says no rent will be charged, but utilities and rates will be paid by Housing New Zealand. It says the project shows that positive outcomes can happen when agencies collaborate. It also says the busway will significantly improve transport choices in the area, and construction starts later this year. The Housing Minister Phil Twyford was unavailable for comment. I tamaki makaurau mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Eva Corlett, tēnei.
From Auckland to the top of the South Island, the fight over a plan to remove a 119-year-old wooden grandstand overlooking the Tākaka Showgrounds is once again off to court. Tasman District Council says it's tried to suit all in its bid to complete a $3.5 million recreation centre next to the stand, but the grandstand has to go as it needs the space for a car park. 2 groups wanting to preserve it are challenging its decision, and supporters are now keeping watch 24/7 in case the council brings in the wrecking ball before the court decides. Our Nelson reporter Tracy Neal caught up with some of them yesterday during an alpine winter blast blowing through the bleachers.
There's a chill wind blowing through Takaka, not from fresh snow on the hills, but from a community bitter about plans to take away a treasured piece of its past. Pam Delaney has lived in Takaka since 1979 and has joined the group of rostered volunteers to keep watch on the grandstand, rain, hail or shine. She explains what it means to the community.
Oh, it's just the history that's been here over 100 years. Why demolish something that's history of the town?
Mrs. Delaney has a flask of hot tea to help her stay warm and a smorgasbord of donated food to keep hunger at bay.
There's always something to eat.
I can see a bag of chicken feed, Pick and Lay there. Is that?
It's a rubbish bag. But the food that's been brought up here is incredible.
By the community?
By the community, yep. People that can't be here.
There's plenty of time also to log poems and drawings in the communal volunteers' diary. The Golden Bay A&P Association has teamed up with the Golden Bay Grandstand Community Trust to launch this latest bid to save the stand. A&P Association Vice President Noel Bagent grew up in the Bay, left at 16 and returned 6 years ago after being away almost half a century.
My great-grandfather was the very first president of this show, and then following on from that, my grandfather, he was also president and life member of the A&P show. My mum and dad have both been president, and then when I came over here I thought it was time that I did my bit as well.
The two organisations are seeking a High Court review of the Council's earlier decision, which has already run the gamut of planning and legal processes. Last year, the Trust lost an Environment Court bid for an enforcement order that would have prevented the stand's demolition. The Council says it cost ratepayers around $100,000 to defend, and it's looking at about another $40,000 bill in the next round. Another long-time A&P Association member says the council did try to resolve the matter by offering to shift the stand, but Duncan McKenzie says too many questions remained.
The resolution was to shift it off council land onto land nearby, and then to the site to be decided after that where it was going to go back to, so which is totally unacceptable. Once it went off the council land, we'd have a hell of a fight to get it put back on where we wanted it.
Most of the residents in Takaka Township spoken to by RNZ want the grandstand to stay.
Yes, of course it should stay. It's part of our heritage.
I think there are much more important things to be doing.
The people that want it gone, I can't say what I think of them.
I can't see why it can't stay.
Oh, I think it should stay, absolutely. I don't know what the first decision was based on, and I have asked, and many people who have strong opinions don't know.
The grandstand is an assemblage of buildings modified over the years, but it contains remnants of the 1899 open-topped grandstand. Tasman District Mayor Richard Campbell says in 2010 the council and the community began drafting ideas for a new community centre at the site. It opened last year as a multi-sports venue and community centre.
That was worked through with the community. At one stage, the council decided we actually weren't going to build it at all because we were wanting to reduce debt and not do an additional recreational facility, but there was a strong call from Golden Bay to reintroduce it into the long-term plan, so we did.
Mr Kempthorne says the new centre was built with about $1 million of funds raised in the Golden Bay community. He's disappointed that the matter is going to court yet again.
We're at a stage now, because of the public pressure, there is a lot of angst and we're in a bit of a spot.
The matter will be heard tomorrow in the High Court in Wellington. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
The legendary US motorcycle maker Harley-Davidson is to shift its production of bikes for sale in Europe to factories outside the United States. The company says it's responding to tariffs imposed by the European Union in retaliation for Donald Trump's new measures against EU steel and aluminium. Mr Trump says he's surprised that Harley-Davidson, as he put it, decided to wave the white flag. The BBC's Chris Buckler reports.
From the roar of the engine to the iconic image, Harley-Davidson seemed to have been designed to evoke a sense of Americana. But in future, fewer of the famous bikes will actually be made in the USA. Wisconsin's best-known business has been targeted for tariffs by the EU as part of the tit-for-tat trade skirmish started by President Trump. And although he's boasted this of Harley's,
made in America.
Harley-Davidson, made in America. The company that he welcomed to the White House is looking to shift much of its production overseas.
Again, the European Union is trying to punish U.S. workers because they have engaged repeatedly in unfair trade practices, and the president is saying enough is enough. We'd like to work with the EU to work on a level playing field.
When Donald Trump imposed steep tariffs on imports of steel and aluminium, retaliation was expected. And the European Union have focused on all American products made in the heartlands where the president has sought support, like blue jeans, bourbon and Harley-Davidsons.
One of these motorcycles is a big 1000cc Harley-Davidson.
But the company's glory days of easy riding have been left long behind. In the United States, sales have slumped and customers in other countries have become much more important.
Until you've been on a Harley-Davidson, you haven't been on a motorcycle.
But just last week, the firm was warning to get on one of their bikes in Europe would inevitably cost more.
Of course, this will have an impact on price. We will try and make it as painless as possible, but no company can foot this alone.
In the short term, Harley-Davidson now says it intends to absorb the extra costs of $2,200 for each motorcycle. That could amount to $100 million a year. But their longer-term plan of taking production out of the US is worrying some Republicans. Yet President Trump seems determined to move ahead, even if that looks like America going it alone.
Chris Buckler reporting this from Ellis. Hi John, the Waiaweka Gorge has been a problem for decades. My dad worked on it. The geology is part of the problem. The cliffs just crumble and slide. Most of the road is beside the river, so dumping debris narrows the river width. Cutting into the cliff makes slips even more likely. It's always a dangerous road, especially at night. Permanent resolution of the Waiaweka Gorge might include tunnels or viaduct engineering like the Arthur's Pass or Tera Road. Thanks, Alice. That's fantastic feedback. You can text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radioNZ.co.nz. Well, singer Crystal Collins, didn't she cop it like a chook? Apologised this morning for butchering the New Zealand national anthem at the weekend. 3 Porirua teenagers have stepped in to show her and the world how it's done. Porirua college students Teresa Formai and Rosetta Lopa and Anastasia Cirilla heard Collins' rendition, which she performed at the Kiwis versus England rugby game in Denver, and also the backlash it received. It prompted the 16 and 17-year-olds who formed the group Le Art while in intermediate school to post a video of themselves singing their version of the anthem on their Facebook page last night. It's since had 250,000 views and has been shared close to 5,000 times. Our producer Michelle Cook asked Rosetta why they decided to share the video.
Well, we love sharing with our friends and family on our page, and with all the news circulating around our anthem, we just thought it would make sense to share our version of it. So yeah.
And have you sung the anthem before?
Oh yes, we've sung it many times. We all learned it together 7 years ago, and we sung at basketball games, and yeah.
So this is your version of the anthem, and
yeah.
What do you think so far of the response?
The response, we're so blessed. We did not expect the response at all. You know, we just love sharing with anyone, and to get that amount of feedback and comments and shares, we're just so blessed.
What did you think of the rendition at the Kiwis game in the weekend?
Well, we thought it was unfortunate, and it's a very hard song to pull off, especially for a non-New Zealander, and we're proud of her for giving it a go.
Oh, that is so sweet. So that was Rosetta Lopa speaking to our producer Michelle Cook. So let's listen to Teresa, Rosetta and Anastasia and their really stunning version of the New Zealand national anthem. That was pretty good. Porirua College students Teresa Fomai, Rosetta Lopa and Anastasia Cirilla doing a version of the national anthem which made it sound magnificent. Polarised audience last night for and against it, but not when it's sung like that.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The police are hunting for a gunman after a shooting in the Hutt Valley that has put a man in hospital with a chest injury. He's in a stable condition. Officers were called to what they're describing as a domestic incident on George Street in Stokes Valley at 2:15. A resident, Roxanne Couldo, was on her way to pick up her daughter from school when she heard a shot.
I was walking down George Street and I heard a gunshot, a bang, which sounded like a gunshot, and then I saw a young boy and a youngish mum, and he was calling for his mum to come out of the house after the gunshot that went out.
Resident Roxanne Couldo, a section of George Street is still cordoned off. Police say the person they're looking for is not a risk to the public. The Youth Minister, Peeni Henare, hopes a court case relating to the Young Labour summer camp scandal will help bring parents peace of mind. In February, 4 teenagers complained they'd been sexually harassed at the youth camp in Waihi. A 20-year-old man has now been charged with 4 counts of indecent assault and will appear in the Auckland District Court on July the 5th. Mr Henare says the right process has been followed. He says he hopes the court case, whatever the result, will strengthen civics and give parents confidence their children will be safe at political or school events. A report from a review of the Labour Party's handling of the matter is due in about a month. The government will adopt some of the Land and Water Forum's recommendations to halt the decline in water quality, with the Environment Minister saying action in the most at-risk catchments is an immediate priority. The government-commissioned report makes several key recommendations, including nitrogen limits on all catchments, closing loopholes in the Resource Management Act, and setting up a national body to oversee freshwater management. The Minister, David Parker, agrees nutrient limits are needed for catchments, but says more work is required to decide how this should be done.
The issue that isn't resolved that we task them with is how you allocate nutrient discharge rights in catchments where there's too much nutrient pollution of the waterways. And so it really falls to us now to pick up the baton on that and make the final decisions.
David Parker says suggested changes to the RMA will be considered but are not likely to be introduced to Parliament this year. Up to 60 empty houses due to be bulldozed for new roads or state housing will now provide shelter for homeless families over winter. The Monte Cecilia Housing Trust has leased the properties in Pakuranga and Mount Roskill from Auckland Transport and Housing New Zealand under a new scheme. Eva Collette reports.
The houses are earmarked for demolition to make way for new roads or for the development of new state housing over the next 3 to 6 months. Monte Cecilia Housing Trust has begun leasing them and housing families in the meantime. Housing New Zealand checks the properties to see if they're livable, and Monte Cecilia then furnishes and manages them, but the government is paying for it. The Trust's Bernie Smith says the government is walking the talk when it comes to housing families in need. But he says more social housing must be built to rehome the families after the properties are bulldozed. Ko Eva Collette, Tēnei.
An ocean swim series is having to adapt with one of Auckland's most popular beaches repeatedly considered too dirty. Data from the Safe Swim Monitoring Program shows between November and April, Takapuna Beach was under a no-swim warning for almost a third of the time. The program says the beach performed worse than thought, and an investigation is looking to find the source of the poor water quality. The director of the Banana Boat Ocean Swim Series, Scott Rice, says they've had an event at Takapuna for the last 15 years, but last summer had to move elsewhere because of the risk.
It's really had us thinking hard about, how we can adapt. And I think the bottom line is it is about us adapting, because the problem is not something that I'm going to solve, and it's going to take a long time and a lot of money to sort out the reason behind the issue.
Scott Rice says lifeguards won't operate if the beach is at warning level. Emergency services are responding to a serious crash on State Highway 73 on the West Coast Road near Kirwee. The crash occurred about 4:45 this afternoon, close to the intersection with Beeley Road. A police spokesperson says one person has critical injuries and 3 others have moderate to serious injuries, and the serious crash unit has been notified. The US astronaut Buzz Aldrin is suing 2 of his children and his former business manager, saying they stole money from him and are slandering his legacy. The lawsuit was filed in a Florida court 1 week after his children petitioned to take control of his finances. His family members had told a judge that he requires a legal guardian because he is in cognitive decline. The 88-year-old was the second man to ever walk on the surface of the moon. It's 6:05. The Warriors will be hoping their Kiwis contingent will be fit to play in the NRL against the Sharks on Friday night, as injury plagues the side ahead of this week's team selection. The Kiwi Test players' flight back was delayed due to electrical storms, and they aren't due to arrive home until tomorrow. But injuries to David Fusitua and Solomone Kata are giving head coach Stephen Kearney nothing short of a selection headache.
The dilemma that we have is, I can't, make any definite decisions until, later on in the week. That's the circumstance, with, what's happened with the test match in Denver, that in terms of all about, those guys not playing because it's such a big trip. But again, the situation that we find ourselves, we might have to play them.
Stephen Kearney. Australia's future in the World Cup will be decided tonight as they play Peru in their last group game. The Socceroos need a big win over the South Americans and hope France beat Denmark in the other Group C game. There's been a changing of the guard at Sport New Zealand with the appointment of Bill Moran as chair and several new board members. Moran replaces the outgoing chair, Sir Paul Collins, who's been a board member since 2009. Moran, who has been on the board since 2016, spent more than 30 years at Treasury, where he was Chief Operating Officer before retiring in 2016. He's also been a director at New Zealand Football. Former Black Fern Farapama is one of the 3 new board members. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the sampler, Serpent with Feet. And Nick Bollinger samples some curiosities from Sir Paul McCartney. We have episode 2 of Going Fishing, the story of friendship, betrayal, and a possible miscarriage of justice in West Auckland. While our philosopher Anne Kerwin is getting existential with the French thinker Gabriel Marcel. Marcel's work focused on the modern individual struggle in a technologically dehumanising society. And there's more tonight on Nights with me, Paul Brennan, and for Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Then after 10, I'm filling in for Karen Hay, where we are always on the lookout for a developing story or fictional character.
And he's got this boss that's really out to make his life a misery, so life's not that easy for him. But he's the man you would want on the case of, your son had been kidnapped.
Lately, with me, Brian Crump. It's part of Nights on RNZ National.
And now an updated short forecast from the Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Tahepe. Showers and snow to 500 metres from the Desert Road southwards. Showers clearing this evening and overnight and becoming fine, apart from isolated showers in the west of Northland. Gisborne to Wairirapa, coastal showers but generally fine inland. Snow to 500 metres in Wairirapa. Horowhenua to Wellington, showers clearing overnight, fine spells increasing tomorrow. Coastal Canterbury and the Kaikoura coast, showers clearing overnight and becoming mainly fine. And the remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury, also Nelson, Buller, Westland and Northern Fiordland, fine with frosts tomorrow morning. Southern Fiordland, Otago and Southland, a few wintry showers, mainly in the south with snow to 300 metres at first. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower. RNZ National, it's 6:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
And Anna Thomas, thank you very much indeed. Anna, so much feedback coming in on that national anthem. You loved it and you are responding in wonderful terms. Thank you. Let's go back to, I think it was the lead story at 6 o'clock. Armed police are still hunting for a gunman after a shooting in the Hutt Valley. The victim, who was shot in the chest, is now in a serious but stable condition in hospital. Part of George Street in Stokes Valley, which is in the Hutt Valley, of course, is still cordoned off. Our reporter Emma Hatton is there. and joins us now via live view. Hi Emma, what's happening there behind you now? Obviously police very much still there. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so police are still here. They're still armed. There's a cordon set up, as you can see behind me, on the corner of George Street and Speedy Street, so cars can't get through. It's blocked off about 5 or 6 homes, so residents aren't able to get in there. They haven't been able to get in there since about 2 o'clock this afternoon. And it could be up for a few more hours still, as police are still conducting a scene examination at the house, which is about 2 houses down from here.
Yeah, it's certainly being taken very seriously. What can you tell us about the shooting itself? Emma, you spoke to a neighbour, didn't you?
Yeah, so I spoke to a neighbour when we got here earlier this afternoon, and she said she was walking down George Street. She heard a bang. She looked over, and a woman and a young boy was coming out of the house where the incident happened. The woman asked her to call for help, so she called an ambulance and the police. And then she went on to get her own daughter from down at the local shops here, and they also haven't been able to go back to their house, so they've gone to spend the night with whānau down the road.
And so I guess it's hard to say how long the cordon will be up, and while we're talking about what the police are telling you, what are they saying about the person they're still looking for?
Yeah, so they're still looking for the person responsible. They've been inquiring at a number of lower hut properties around the area. It's still ongoing. That they are still looking for that person.
Thanks, Emma. Emma, live from the scene via live view. We will update you if there's anything more to report, but obviously Emma's told us everything that we know so far. The police are still looking for at least one person. There are calls tonight from the Mayor of Gisborne, along with one of the major trucking operators in and out of the city and the region, to make State Highway 2 through the Waiaweka Gorge more secure. The gorge has been closed since the weekend when a slip brought 7,000 cubic metres of rock and debris across the road. Weatherall Transport says the closure will not only add 3 hours to a truck driver's journey each way, but also have a significant financial impact. I asked CEO Steve Weatherall what his company is transporting.
Fresh fruit and produce. Our biggest customer is Leaderbrand Produce, so there's a lot of salad and broccoli, lettuce, etc. So at the moment we're transporting everything. We're going via Napier, so we go Gisborne south for 2.5, 3 hours, and then turn up and come over the Napier Taupo and back up to Auckland, Tauranga that way.
And what's that adding to your trip?
It's adding a good 2.5, 3 hours to the trip. It's more to the point was generally with most of the stuff most of the freight we move backwards and forwards to Gisborne and out of Gisborne to Auckland is our guys are based in Tauranga, so the trucks normally would come from Tauranga to Gisborne during the day or in the early hours of the morning, drop off a load and go back to Tauranga again, and another driver would jump in the truck and take it to Auckland and then load back out of Auckland. So we supply both the supermarket chains into Gisborne here as well, so we'd have on average day 8 to 10 units going each way each day. So at the moment we've got them going around the long way. So the consequences of that is we end up using twice as much equipment to do the same job. We have guys living away from home, so instead of Taupo being their normal swap over point, instead of Tauranga being their swap over point, they end up swapping over in Taupo, or living away from home altogether and just going end to end and stopping at either Auckland or Gisborne. So it just depends on the run and who they're working for on the day, or how much we've got to shift on the day. So it's a huge extra cost in accommodations and trying to keep everybody happy, trying to keep the supermarket shelves full in Gisborne and the produce moving from the growers in here in Gisborne.
Of course, these things happen, and New Zealand is a country in which weather events affect roads all the time. But the Waiaweka Gorge is starting to develop a track record for having slips and being closed, isn't it?
Yes, it has. And I mean, we had situations last year where it wasn't only closed, the Waiaweka wasn't closed, but we had a weather bomb towards Napier as well, and that closed the road south. So actually Gisborne was cut off for a couple of days last year, both directions. The Waiaweka Gorge, since 2012, I suppose, was the big one. We were out for 5 or 6 weeks with it closed in 2012, and since then, every year, we've had closures on a fairly regular basis every year where we've had a few days out. This one here is looking like going on to at least the end of the week at this stage. I guess it's the don't know factor that's the hard one for us, because we can't actually plan what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. We just know that it's likely to be closed until the end of the week. We could get to the end of the week and they turn around and say it might be closed for another 4 or 5 days. We wouldn't really know.
And the thing is, Gisborne is a region that needs some luck. And what luck it has in terms of its ability to grow magnificent produce is monetised by its ability to get that produce to market efficiently and quickly.
Yeah, of course it is. So everything we produce today out of here was picked today, and it's on a truck tonight. It's in your supermarkets tomorrow morning. That's quite simple, and we do that all over the country every night out of Gisborne here, in large quantities. It's a huge food bowl around here, and that's what we're good at this part of the world. But if this was to turn into a Manama 2 Gorge type scenario where this wild wicket closed for an extended length period, that would seriously jeopardise the chances of Gisborne competing around the country at all. That's the reality.
Have you been surprised? Now, I'm not having a go at anyone here, but given that the Waiaweka Gorge, as you said, was closed for 5 or 6 weeks in 2012, and given that there have been slips and closures regularly since then, have you been surprised by the extent of long-term remediation efforts? In other words, the efforts made to keep this road open?
The efforts are being made, but I guess the difference about now, we've been going in and out of here for close on 30 years. The difference is 10 years ago probably, they would have bulldozed the track over the top of it and we would have kept on moving, and they would have probably opened it up for so many hours a day, morning and night, so we could get produce and freight back into Gisborne. Whereas the world we live in today requires them to get geotechs in to check it all out, and it's a very health and safety focused environment we live in now. So the ability for us to go into that gorge now is just not there. I mean, we used to go and sit and camp by the slip and wait for them to clear it, and we'd carry on through. That doesn't happen these days. The road's closed. We don't go anywhere near it.
Is there a plan B we're missing? Is there a way that either that route can be made safer, more secure, or is there another route we're missing, or is Gisborne always going to be stuck in this kind of situation where it's a gorgeous place, but by golly, it's hard to get in and out of?
Yeah, well, we've got to put it in perspective. If you're talking we're doing sort of 8 or 10 a day each day, for 365 days a year, the fact that it's out for 4 or 5 days a year on a percentage basis is not huge, but it's certainly disruptive, and it messes up a lot of people's lives and a lot of people's ability to get their produce to market on time. And that's what we fight with now, is managing to keep our schedules going with adding the extra time to go around the long way, etc., etc.
Steve Wetherell, who is the CEO of a trucking company of the same name. Now, Parekawhia McLean is NZTA's Regional Relationships Manager for the Waikato Bay of Plenty region. That's a big old region. A short time ago, I asked her when the Waiaweka Gorge would reopen.
Got our contractors and teams out there now clearing the 7,000 cubic metres of material from both sides. So we're expecting that to be done obviously within the next couple of days and hopefully before the weekend. But at the same time, we've got our geotech specialists there making an assessment in terms of the remedial work that needs to be done as well. So, I can't put a firm date on it, but we are hoping it will be within the next few days and hopefully before the weekend.
This gorge is trouble, isn't it? This isn't the first time this has happened, and I know the Mayor Meng Foon has been talking to NZTA about making this route north from Gisborne more secure.
He has been, and so has Mayor John Forbes has been talking to us from the Opotiki end. We're currently completing a business case which will look at the longer term resilience improvements that need to be done. We've been working collaboratively, clearly with our local government partners, but also the users, iwi and the wider community, and that's really important from our perspective that we have engagement and that they're part of the solution as well.
Yes, Ming Foon says that you haven't been working with him, that the idea was initially floated and that he hasn't heard from NZTA since.
Well, that's not quite correct. We certainly have been having conversations with his people. That may not have been directly with him, but we've had council staff involved with the business case that has been developed, and that will be put before the mayors within the next few weeks.
And what is that business case? In short, is there a plan B, or is substantial remediation and work required on plan A, which is State Highway 2?
The focus is on State Highway 2. It's also focused on State Highway 35, which is the alternate route, the longer route right around the coast. So that is where the focus is in terms of long-term resilience improvements for both those corridors.
There was a lot of work done after the closure in 2012, wasn't there? And if I look at the work that was done between October 2012 and May 2013, after State Highway 2 north of Gisborne was effectively closed for all of March in 2012, somewhere up to $20 million was spent. And NZTA said at the time the benefits were, and I quote, "The project will improve route security through the Waiaweka Gorge and minimise the impact of large slips as lengthy closures impact on road users." Now, was the work not done well enough back in 2012? And if that's the case, what will you do differently now?
Well, I can't comment in terms of the design work, but what I can say is certainly what we're seeing, not just within this particular route, but across the country, the weather events, the frequency of those, and the impact that they're having on many of our corridors. And I'm reflecting on, we're mindful of the State Highway 25, which is the Thames Coromandel route, which has recently had work done on it as well. So we are always looking at how we can continue to improve. We will never ever, there's never ever a guarantee that we will get it right all the time, but we are working collaboratively with those communities and the users and councils to find the right solution for those corridors.
Absolutely. And let's talk about the specific corridor. What do you think getting it right will look like? Because this is a hell of a piece of road. Probably some of our listeners won't have driven it, but anyone who has driven it will remember it. So the slip risk is absolutely apparent the whole way along it. How do you remediate that? How do you protect the road against this kind of event taking place again and again and again?
Well, you're quite right, John. I've driven that route over the last few months, State Highway 2 through the gorge, and it is fairly unique. It's got its particular topography and terrain. It's very steep, but it's also, in some parts reasonably wide. But it is, I think that's where it's important that when we are looking at long-term solutions, we are doing that particularly with those users, so the commuters, but also those travelling with goods and logs and so on. That's important that we have the design solutions where they are involved. You can always engineer your way out of it, but at the same time, we can never ever guarantee we'll fix it permanently, given the weather events that we are experiencing.
Parekawhia McLean from NZTA. We'd love your feedback if you're in the region, 2101, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Great email from Alice before. Thank you, Alice. The Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters wants young families to be able to buy a home with 5 times their annual income. It's an ambitious goal, however, given the most recent annual Demographia survey showing the Auckland house prices are nearly 9 times the median household income. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Winston Peters says buying a first home is out of reach of most young families, and the government wants to change that.
There was a time when that target used to be between 3.5 and 4, and in modern context maybe 5 is pretty high, but that should be achievable before too long. That's what our aspiration is, to have a first house buying regime where young families with not a great deal of discretionary money nevertheless can buy their first home.
Mr Peters accepts that wages will have to grow and house prices stabilise over time for that to happen.
It doesn't mean that house prices would fall now, and they haven't, but it means that there'll be a catch-up period with greater supply and greater incomes where people will be able to afford houses which they can't afford now.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, was somewhat more cautious about house prices being 5 times the average income being any formal government target.
Oh, well, I think that's what a lot of people would like to see. I mean, in New Zealand, historically, they were lower than that at a time in the past. Clearly, they've spiked up, particularly in places like Auckland, very high. We'd all like to see them come down. I know that that's a goal that the Acting Prime Minister's expressed, and I can see that that would be something we'd like to achieve. Clearly, it would take quite some time on those grounds.
The government's plans to boost housing supply is mostly focused on its Kiwi Build program. National's Judith Collins used Parliament's question time today to grill the Housing Minister Phil Twyford on his plans to use off-site manufacturing to help build more Kiwi Build homes. She asked what he meant when he suggested foreign direct investment could be part of that. Mr Twyford replied to jeers from the opposition benches that had always been the government's plan.
We welcome foreign direct investment in the building of new homes. We stand by our long-standing position that the domestic real estate market...
Judith Collins asked her next question with a very wry smile.
If the funding will come from overseas, the flat packs will come from overseas, and even the workers now look like they're going to be coming from overseas, what part of Kiwi Build is Kiwi?
We are not anticipating bringing flat packs in from overseas. We are not planning on bringing workers in from overseas. The Kiwi element in Kiwi Build is young Kiwi families getting the opportunity to own their own home after a decade of denial.
Ato I te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwell.
It's known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a giant ocean accumulation of plastic waste said to be 3 times the size of France. Now a team of scientists has set sail from Hawaii to investigate the patch and the health and environmental hazards caused by such plastics. The BBC's environment correspondent reports.
The latest scientific estimate of the size of the swirling mess of plastic known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch says it's 16 times bigger than previously thought. As well as the dangers posed to sea creatures who eat tiny fragments of this plastic soup, scientists are also keen to find out about the toxic impact of chemicals in the plastic that emerge when they break down in sunlight and seawater. British sailor Emily Penn says this is a key reason why she is leading an all-woman team to capture samples of water and plastic from the garbage patch. She says that plastics in the ocean produce hormone-disrupting chemicals that pose significant dangers to women.
These chemicals, they're endocrine disruptors. They mimic hormones and stop those important chemical messages. So for us women, this is a big deal. They affect pregnancy, and we can also pass them on to our children during childbirth and breastfeeding. So with such a women-focused issue, I really wanted to take this on and tackle it with an all-women crew.
While awareness of the problems posed by plastic is growing, researchers fear that the true scale of the issue hasn't been fully grasped. They say there are up to 5 trillion fragments of plastic floating around the waters of the world. They're so small and so fine that they can never be removed.
Matt McGrath from the BBC. So much feedback coming in on that national anthem sung by 3 students from Porirua College. Teresa Whamai, Rosetta Lopa and Anastasia Cirilla. Damn it, John, you can really find them. As an old fart, I've never felt any loyalty or excitement about our anthem, but these 3 people put a lump in my throat. Not sure what caused it, but I can tolerate that if I hear more of them. Beautiful. That brought tears to my eyes, says Daz. It made me proud to be a Kiwi. I'm proud of our anthem. I'd like to hear more of it sung in Māori. I hope the NZRL was listening. Let's get those girls to the next Kiwis test, says Neil, please. What fabulous young women, brilliant rendition. Fantastic, they should be invited to sing the anthem at the next AB's test. Goosebumps, beautiful, thank you to these very special girls. John, that version of the anthem reduced me to tears. Why don't we hear that all the time, says Christine. Stunning. What a truly fantastic rendition of our national anthem, says Mary. And bless, how talented are those girls, says another listener. So many people contacted about this beautiful performance. So let's let them sing us out. Thanks for being with us, everyone. Here is Teresa, Rosetta and Anastasia.
Triple star,
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police are continuing to search for a gunman who fled after a shooting in the Lower Hutt suburb of Stokes Valley this afternoon. The Environment Minister says the government will prioritise the catchments most at risk from declining water quality in response to the Land and Water Forum's report. About 60 houses due to be bulldozed for roads or development in Auckland are now to shelter homeless families over winter. And the Gisborne Mayor says he and other mayors have been trying to meet the Transport Agency over the instability of State Highway 2 through Waiōeka Gorge, which has suffered another major slip. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Kia ora, Melody Thomas here with Season 2 of the podcast Bang, exploring sex, relationships and intimacy. In Episode 5, we're exploring some frequently asked audience questions, like what's it like to be asexual?